Senator Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Honourable Senate. I rise to lend my voice to this brief discussion as it relates to the report that would have come out of the Joint Select Committee in relation to the Data Protection Bill. Now, you would have heard many of my colleagues would have addressed salient points arising out of the bill. So I took any source of avoid repetition. I don't intend to repeat much of what was said, and I rather would prefer to focus on the actual amendments that came out of the Joint Select Committee. Now, put it up there for me. Now, the first thing that I would like to highlight from the Joint Select Committee is that we made reference to, within the initial bill, the unedited bill, made reference to the Credit Reference Agency. Now, that was within the definition of the bill. However, as we perused the bill, we noticed it was mentioned no other else within the bill. So essentially, it had no bearing or purpose. It was a definition within the bill that was never referred later on. So to reduce cluster, so to speak, we determined that that should be something that should be removed from the bill. The next issue that was highlighted within the Joint Select Committee related to Clause 4.7. At Clause 4.7 of our bill, it stated that, and I just want to pull it up on the iPad here quickly. Clause 4.7 of the bill states, which deals with the principles. Right. Clause 4 of the bill deals with the principles relating to the processing of personal data. And within Clause 4, subset 1, it highlights the numerous principles. It is a quite exhaustive list. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. About 7 different principles that were highlighted in Section 4, subset 1. Now, at Clause 4, subset 7, it states that the data controller shall take reasonable steps to ensure the reliability of any employee of his who has access to personal data. Now, during the discussions of the Joint Select Committee, the question was raised as to what exactly does the terminology ensure the reliability. Now, it was felt that the term ensure the reliability was ambiguous and therefore not clear, and it created an environment for confusion as it related to the application of that clause. So based on the ambiguity of the terminology, it was determined that that clause needed clarification. And it was determined that we should rephrase Clause 4.7 to now reflect as follows. Rather than the term ensure reliability, we removed that term and focused more on the essence of Clause 4.1, which was the principles of processing personal data. So now the clause now reads that the data controller shall have to take reasonable steps to ensure that his employees who have access to the personal data comply with the requirements that are set out at subset 1, which is what I mentioned earlier, the existing principles, the guidelines in which the processor or the data controller, whoever that person may be that processes information, has to abide by these guiding principles. So that in itself improved the strength of the bill as it relates to the removing the ambiguity in the application of Clause 4, subsect 7. The committee then dealt with the issue of consent under Clause 9, subset 1. Now, there was a robust discussion as it related to this clause, because the whole purpose of the data protection bill is to catapult us into a digital era. We're now, the era that we are in the 21st century, we're trying to move away from paper, we're trying to move away from the analog way in which we did things to a more digitized way of doing business. Which means that on some occasions, persons may not necessarily be asked or give written consent for their information to be processed. So therein lies the problem. In the unedited bill, clause 9.1 indicated let's give indulgence. Clause 9.1 indicated that the processing of sensitive personal data shall be prohibited unless the data subject gives written consent to the processing. Now, if we left that as the legislation to govern us, it means that when I go onto the internet and a request is put to me as it relates to my consent, and I click yes, or I click confirm, or I click agree, does that constitute written consent? It is something that will be left to interpretation, and some bright lawyer might challenge it, and there we find ourselves in a legal battle to determine if the person's consent was actually given for the processing of that information. So as I said, because we're in a digital era, it was felt as though we should remove the word written consent and just leave the word consent, and then go to the definition for what actual consent means. And in a nutshell, the essence of consent means that we must always be sure, we must be clear that the person who is given consent is aware of what you're intending to do, and that it can be unequivocally noted that he has given you that consent to process his data. And that is what the definition does within the bill. So we've removed written consent from clause 9 subset 1 and just left the word consent, so that we are now clear that any form in which a person can consent to data, regardless of what it may be, the technology may not even exist today, but whatever form of technology that is used to garner consent, it must be explicit and clear. That is the intent of this bill now, after the Joint Select Committee had made its recommendation. Clause 71. We then looked at the issue of clause 71 subset M, which deals with the data commissioner. Now, the data commissioner is the person who is responsible for the oversight and general administration of this bill. And part of his duties that were highlighted in section 71 is for him to give advice, him or her, to give advice to the minister, the public authority. That was the extent based on subsection M under section 71. His advice was limited only to the minister or public authority. And the Joint Select Committee determined that that might be impractical, might not be logical, because technically speaking, there's a data processor and a data controller, both who are equally involved within the processing of data. And if there is an issue that arises, the commissioner should be able to give advice directly to either of those two persons. But section 71M limits that in the unedited bill. It strictly limits it to the minister or the public authority. So it was determined that we would amend that and include a new word in which would suggest or other person. And any other person involved in the act, which now allows the commissioner to have the latitude to determine if he wants to advise the minister, if he wants to advise the public authority, or if he wants to directly if he directly wants to advise the data processor or the data controller. That is the amendment that was recommended by the Joint Select Committee. And finally, the other salient point I would like to highlight here today relates to section 93, clause 93, which deals with liability and compensation. Senator Drates highlighted it earlier about the beauty of persons having the opportunity to seek redress if either the data controller or the data processor contravenes this act. This clause now was not inserted in the unedited bill. And by the recommendations of the Joint Select Committee, it has now been inserted to ensure that anytime, thank you, to ensure that at any time, either the data processor, the data controller, or any person under this act contravenes it, the data subject, the person who has been wronged, would now have recourse under this legislation, under this bill. So those are just some of the salient and, in my view, most important highlights out of the Joint Select Committee. The discussions, as I said, were robust. There was a number of other recommendations that were highlighted, but the Joint Select Committee was of the view, based on all of the information that was before it, that these were the most important aspects which needed to be changed within the bill. And I stand before you in support of the bill. I think it's a good bill, it's timely, and I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Senator Lynette Holder.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And President, good afternoon to all colleagues.
Good afternoon.
I didn't get a chance to speak earlier on this bill, and I thank you for the opportunity now to make a very short intervention, very short, this afternoon. Mr. President, I took note of the comments from those who shared during the earlier debates and discussions and so on, those who came to make their submissions to the Joint Select Committee. I took note of an earlier comment that reminded us of the fact that the global space has changed. Things have changed relative to how we do business. We are in an environment, an age where technology is the game changer, we say, relative to how business is done, relative to how we communicate, how data is collected, etc. So, Mr. President, in principle, I agree that at this time, Barbados needs to have the necessary data protection legislation to ensure that we give a sense of comfort, not only to businesses, but to consumers who will at times be required to share their information. How many of us in this chamber, Mr. President, will admit to the fact that many times we go and we fill out a simple form in accessing a service, in engaging in a particular organization somewhere, and after sharing that information with that particular agency, we subsequently receive all kinds of emails about various products and other things, and sometimes we can only assume that the sender got our information from that form that we filled out earlier in something that was non-related. I am involved in an association, Mr. President, that collects information on members, and I have on so many occasions to tell third-party interests who would write to us and ask to have members' lists and members' data and so on, that I cannot share it, even outside of this piece of legislation. I've had on many occasions to tell individuals and organizations that we feel that we are bound by a sense of organization, member, privacy and relationship not to share the information on our members and our constituents. So that background, Mr. President, lends to why we all in this chamber believe this afternoon that we are going in the right direction relative to this piece of legislation. And last May, on the 25th, actually, when the EU legislators approved the GDPR, actually when it came into effect, let me say, that too, again, cemented for us that globally things have changed. This is a digital world. It is a digital economy that we are, progressing towards, and so we must have that legislation to protect our businesses, consumers, and the like. But Chair, I have one concern, President, I have one concern this afternoon about this proposed bill. You see, a few weeks ago, about 8 organizations that represent micro, small, and medium enterprises in this country met. I believe it was on the invitation of the ministry responsible for small business to look at the implications of this bill on that particular sector, and to be able to proffer some ideas, to proffer some proposals relative to how we can improve this legislation to continue to strengthen that enabling environment that we want for the MSME sector. The fact is that we are all here, I believe, to ensure that we can facilitate business and thus grow our economy. Now, I didn't see, as I was going through the report, that the report from that meeting was presented to the Joint Select Committee, and maybe it wasn't done to time. I'm unsure what happened there, Mr. President. But I believe it is important this afternoon that I share some of those concerns. You see, relative to the proposals, I believe it is, Mr. President, Part 6 of the bill that speaks to a number of functions. It speaks to the data controller, speaks to the data processor, and the data privacy officer as 3 critical functions that are needed within the organization to help to ensure that we protect data. Now, 3 functions, Mr. President, separate functions, mind you, within a small firm, might I add, within a micro firm, is a challenge. In and of itself, it is a challenge. And now I like to support my points with data. And Mr. President, in this chamber, I've quoted before, and I wish to do so now. Again, this research that was done in 2016 by Sciences UWI on what we call the state of small business in Barbados. And this data has a 95% confidence interval. That plus or minus 5%, it is accurate. Okay? So, Mr. President, in light of the fact that you can have confidence in the data said then that there were 9,600 odd formal firms operating in Barbados. This was 2016. We suspect that there may very well be some change today. But at that time, Mr. President, these formal enterprises in Barbados were in excess of 9,600. But what I'm particularly keen about and wish to share with this chamber is that the data suggested that of that number, 45.3% were micro firms. And a micro firm, based on the research, is a firm that has less than 5 employees. So 45.3% of those firms were considered micro. Now, if that is the case, and we're talking about less than 5, and actually, the median from that survey suggests that these micro firms had 1 employee. That's the median. The median was 1. So if the median is 1, Mr. President, and we are asking for firms to identify 3 functionaries in their organizations to be compliant with this piece of legislation, Mr. President, we have a challenge. We have a challenge. And you are so correct. A lot of them would be unable to respond to the call. And so I want to register this afternoon for the minister responsible for science and innovation that we rethink this construct relative to these 3 separate functions that the firm would have to engage and employ to be compliant with this legislation, for the simple fact that it is just impossible to do so when a micro business does not even have, on many an occasion, that number of employees. But, Mr. President, we want to be in compliance with the legislation. We want to make sure, Mr. President, that as micro firms, and I'm focusing on micro because the small enterprise has more employees. The small enterprise has more employees. The median for the small enterprise was actually 8, based on the survey. So I was focusing more on the micro firms that represented 45% of the population of formal firms. Now, I am of the view that, given the fact this is, I believe, the first country in CARIFORUM, maybe the Caribbean, that is looking at this piece of legislation, that we have every opportunity now to make sure that we can do all that we need to by way of consultation, by way of improvements and so on, that we can serve those constituents that are top of mind for us. Now, my research, and I believe I heard the opposition senator made the point as well this morning, that there are no other jurisdictions right now in CARIFORUM that have yet passed this kind of legislation. There are those, Jamaica, I know my research indicated Jamaica too was in the process of doing the consultations and so on, right? But we have the opportunity now to look at this and to ensure that we can put a piece of legislation in place that will represent those constituents that we serve, because we do not want to deter persons from doing business. We do not want to deter micro firms in particular from being enfranchised. We don't want to deter them from growing their market share, from expanding, etc. We don't want that. We want to be a facilitator, to have an enabling environment. And might I add quickly, I heard Senator Tate's comment, but might I add quickly that I believe, as I stand here this afternoon, that the current administration, matter of fact, every Barbados Labour Party administration has had the MSME sector top of mind and has always worked to ensure that we put enabling legislation to grow that sector. So I'm satisfied that this one as well will want to make sure that we do right by our small and micro firms. And so might I quickly then offer a thought. We have at present a Safety and Health at Work Act. We call it for short the SHAW Act. And whereas every piece of legislation may have its own share of challenges, there's a beautiful piece, Mr. President, in this act that I find to be representative of what we want to see in our MSME sector. And that is, the legislation calls for a safety committee. A part of being compliant to the act, the legislation calls for a safety committee. But the legislation goes a step further and suggests that a safety committee should be appointed within organizations that had 25 or more employees. So that piece of legislation gave consideration, in my view, to size and to the reality that exists on the ground. It says, however, that if you have less than 25, you can have a safety officer. So that safety officer can be drawn from any of the others. Even the manager, the owner himself can be the safety officer. And it also says that you must have a safety policy. And so organizations like the one I represent and others, over time, the Employers Confederation in particular, have been able to write templates, draft templates, to give to smaller firms so that they can be compliant. So you have a safety policy You have a safety officer if you're less than 25 firms, but if you're more than 25, you have now a committee, because the committee takes into account the fact that you have people that constitute a committee. But it's not a committee of one. So if you look at the legislation that defines small firms, the Small Business Development Act already gave us a definition that small means 25 or less. Our research, as I quoted it earlier, suggested that micro was 5 or less, but the point is, you have a definition for small. What that tells me, Mr. President, is that any piece of legislation coming forward now that is going to treat to MSMEs relative to putting in place administrative arrangements and so on that they be compliant need to understand that definition. And I would think need to make provisions for those micro small firms so that they can comply. So saying then that we want to have these 3 different functions in a firm that will not have 3 employees, that will not have the staff to be able to comply, I think, Mr. President, warrants review. I think it warrants review. Now, when I looked at the comments from the public and organizations, associations, and so on, to the Joint Select Committee, yes, we know that some of them did not fundamentally change the legislation and the drafting of the legislation. Some of them call for a public education and sensitization exercise. We agree to that. Some of them call for a gestation period that allows for implementation or allows for the firms and so on to become compliant. We agree with that. These things don't necessarily have to be in law. These things can easily be done by the ministry that administers the legislation. So we agree that we need to ensure that persons can have the opportunity to put their house in order. But I think, Mr. President, this is fundamental. This is fundamental to its design. This is fundamental to its construct, that we treat to the definitions that we know that exist and the reality on the ground relative to micro firms in particular. Mr. President, my second point, as I wrap up, also looks at Part 4, which addresses exemptions. Now, I think it was Mahatma Gandhi that made the point that the greatness of a nation can be judged by how it treats to its weakest members. And so we need to be mindful that those micro firms are vulnerable. Mahatma Gandhi, sir. Mahatma Gandhi said that. How a nation treats to the weakest of its members, weakest, will, in a sense, define its greatness even in history's pages. And so we need to do right by our micro firms. Now, I was making a point about exemptions, and I took note of the list mentioned there: parliamentary privilege and national security and so on. And again, another thought, that there are business support organizations that operate within the business community that may very well have a right, a justification for exemption because of the nature of the data that they manage. We have microfinance institutions. We have membership organizations involved in business support services, involved in advocacy. And I am hopeful, it doesn't have to be in legislation, but I'm hopeful that as this Section 5 speaks to the minister having the wherewithal to extend that list, that some consideration can be given as we go forward to including those types of organizations that manage membership data, sensitive membership data, that we want to ensure some sort of protection for them, that they too can be exempted. So, Mr. President, as I conclude, in principle, yes, this is a good effort on our part to protect our constituents, to protect consumers, to protect businesses by putting this piece of legislation in place. It is a good start, I believe, based on the comments from many who presented at the Joint Select Committee. We heard from the public that we just would want to make sure that we can communicate well over the next 2 years or so, that we administer this legislation well. But I want to suggest in closing that a substantive part of this has to do with the obligation of micro firms to have 3 different functions within their organization in order to comply to this legislation. So I hope, Mr. President, that some consideration will be given to that. And with those words, I'm obliged.
Senator Frank.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I won't be long. Senator Gretz was so comprehensive. She went out of my sales for the better part, and then Senator Holder, she did just that too. So I'm left with very few things to say, but I still need to mention a few. But first, let me start by saying that this is a good first step. I'm not opposed to it. And I will start by complimenting the minister who brought this bill. She's done it so in the best traditions of Parliament and the Westminster system that we've had. When this bill first came, I hadn't read a word of it. To be truthful, I haven't read it.
And you still have.
No, trust me, I read it. And the minister was aware of that, and she decided not to force the way like some other people when they lead in the Senate do. And then she also sent it to a select committee where the public at large will get a chance to see what the government is doing on our behalf. And I really must commend her, and I must commend to her colleagues and an example that they should follow. I'm not going to do that too often, sir, so what I'm doing now is better appreciate it. Yeah. In the good old days, sir, people used to go, but it's called fishing. You know, and they used to steal your data by you having receipts, go in your garbage and steal the little stuff. Yeah, steal paper, and then they will steal your identity, steal everything. It is now a bit more complicated than that. People steal your information by just passing close to you. There are these devices where you can pass it in somebody's purse and you copy all the information from their magnetic strips on their credit cards or what have you. Now, people are supposed now to have these little wallets and stuff where you can put your cards in that can't be penetrated by this thing, but lots of it go on. I remember being trained by the credit union when this type of stealing first started to appear, and one of our teachers showed us where people would put a device on their belt at gas stations, and they would take your credit card from you or your ATM card, and they'll just swipe it by their waist, and next thing you are robbed. So you don't have to have one of these things on top of the ATM and people go in there, and they can steal it right in your pocket. So I am grateful that government is mindful and leading the way, because we are now leading in the Caribbean in this area. And I like my Barbados are leaders, you know. I remember one time we used to lead in cricket, and now we follow so far behind them funny. But I like when Barbados leads. I'm proud when Barbados takes the lead. We're not going to, this bill is not perfect, sir. There are areas that, like Senator Holder mentioned, I made a note here and had to write Senator Holder next to it because about these 3 officers that these people are ready to have. My focus was not about the companies that would be able to afford them. I was more concerned about who you're going to give these jobs to. Because suppose you don't have some person in the organization willing to perform these functions, you can't force them because these jobs were not in your contemplation when you selected the job descriptions. So a fellow might say to you, that is not in my job description, so I'm not doing that. So you might be forced to hire additional staff. Mind you, will hire additional staff to join the union, so I don't mind, but the thing is, you know, the thing is, that we must recognize now that companies, far from hiring new people, are laying off. Right? But I want to focus more on something that's more personal to me about data that people use without my consent or without anybody's consent. 2 years ago, I was sitting in my car waiting for the traffic to change. And someone came down with a car and ran into the back of me and sent me to the doctor and all kind of x-rays and all kind of things I had to have. Still not myself yet. But but what happened? The insurance company said they wanted me to go to their doctor for him to assess me and determine if I'm faking it or not. Sir, well, I went to the doctor armed with all the little, you know, they give you your songs and all kinds of stuff on a little diskette now, you know, you can give it to the doctor and he would think. So I go on with a handful of them and I got him there to give it to the doctor because he knew he want to see them. He asked me, you had x-rays? I said yes. He asked me where? I told him, Marvin on his computer, type a couple of things, and there was all of my guts on this man's screen. He had all of my x-rays. Yeah? Yeah, I can see all of my intestines and stuff on the man's screen. But my point is, I did not give those x-ray people, or those ultrasound people, or those CT scan people, any permission to spread my guts all over the Barbados, anybody. They took it upon themselves to take my information and give it to who they feel like. As a matter of fact, it was accessible on the internet because this doctor went on to his computer, logged on, and bam, and there it was, me and my finery. That, I called my lawyer. I want to know if this is right. I didn't give permission because when that same lawyer that I'm using to take my case, when she wanted my information, I had to write and sign. But here we have it. This doctor goes into his computer and pull up my x-rays. And I'm there in shock now, you know, because I'm not usually dumbfounded, but I'm shocked because, mind you, I didn't know it looked so good. But the information, all of my information that I thought was personal to me was spread across there. So what happens now with this information, but not only me, but everybody else who had x-rays from these particular companies who do x-rays. I don't know if the hospital does it too, I don't know. They put your information out there for all and sundry, or who got a keyboard and a password or whatever, to get my information. Something is wrong with that. I didn't give consent. I might not want you to know that I have a little problem here or there. I don't want everybody to know. I'm not going to tell you what that problem is. Don't worry. You set it up with your mouth open. I'm not telling you. But I don't want that information to be known. That is why this is timely. When you take my information and spread it about the place without my consent. You know, and at first I was trying to sue somebody. I wanted to be compensated for the person who breached my trust and the company. I didn't authorize that company to give away my x-rays to anybody, to put them online, to do anything with them. So so this will be taken care of now. But what happened? Yeah, yes, of course, you told me earlier. But let me move on from my own personal issues now. Huh? No, but she told me things too. The data controller, the data privacy officer, data processor, and at 50 subsection 1, it says the data controller must be registered. And subsection 2 says that you registered on the payment of a prescribed fee. When I hear prescribed fee for doing work, I always have a problem with that. I do not feel anybody should have to pay to do their job. Even lawyers who have to pay their fees every year, the professional fees and all kind of stuff, I feel that is wrong. Before you start doing a single thing, before you earn $1, you have to, in some instances, a lot of people like the president don't have to worry about that, the fees. Easy. But there are some other people who, I know that's easy for you, but I mean it's easy because you can afford it. But it is, I feel it is wrong that you force a man or a woman or anybody to pay to work. This is what it is. This is what it looks. That's what I call it, paying to work. These professional fees and all kind of stuff, and we are now spreading it to the under section 50, and I think it's 57 for the data privacy office and somebody else. I feel that requirement should not be there. I feel you should not have to pay to work. The next thing you're going to want to do is to set that trade unions to go pay to work too and access to register, have a fee and all kind of stuff. So I got to resist it now. Before you know, when your neighbor's house burning, you go out it, you don't get over by you. This creeping fee, everything is a fee, everything is a fee. You know, the law required you to have these people. Then you got to pay me, you got to pay now for them to work too. I think something is wrong with that. Right? I have to touch on something that my colleague said about ease of doing business. It's a bit estranged from this piece of legislation, but I have to talk about it because it was mentioned. They said that you set up a company in Barbados, it takes about 15 days. The reason for that is that there were not enough officers working in the corporate affairs division to do that work. So, what government did? Government sent home some. In the restructuring, government went and sent home. You're not getting the work done fast enough because you didn't have enough staff to process the work because the work coming in fast and furious. And you decided, well, since we don't have enough staff to do all this work, let's cut it. Let's cut the staff. But there's a sinister motive for that, and I want to mention it here now because I don't think if I get another chance. They want to privatize or the corporate affairs department so that's to make it inefficient. That's what they're doing. They're making sure that the work cannot be done there, and they're bringing in Canadians to do the work that we in Barbados are competent and capable to do. It's just that we don't have the manpower to do it. And you have persons at the Corporate Affairs Intellectual Property Office who process all this information and stuff for us. So I got to bring back the data part. And you're now looking to send them home and give the jobs to somebody from Canada. Now, if you're saying that our system is deficient, train the people. Give them some training. Don't give the department over to some private entity. It is wrong. You know, all of a sudden we want to get rid of civil servants, we want to get rid of everybody else and stuff. Sorry? So I'm sounding a bit of caution to the government because I want some attention focused on the fact that this government is moving behind the scenes to get rid of jobs in Barbados and give them to non-nationals to run in this country. And these jobs are people who are processing our data. I understand they do it in our registry as well. right? They're doing it to the land registry as well. But corporate affairs does not need to go anywhere. They make a profit every year. They can make more, but because they're not making more because they don't have the resources, the government did not provide them with the resources. You asked me to make bricks, but you didn't give me any straw. And then one punish me for not making the bricks. And then you can say, well, okay, since you're not getting the bricks made, let me go to Canada and get some people to make those bricks for us. You know? This is wrong. I don't understand this obsession the government has to taking everything and giving it to foreign entities to run. Be educated people. And be trainable. Be trainable. So, I understand what you're saying, Senator Leader, but I am talking about an entity that processes our data. You know, the corporate affairs, intellectual property, you don't want much more data than that. So I want to keep them, I want to keep them in local hands. The government has plans, and they have meetings already to decimate this organization and give it to somebody in Canada. And I don't understand why a company from Canada would want to take, come here to, corporate affairs make $6 million a year. Somebody in Canada can relocate from Canada, come here to make $6 million over a year. So it means that the fees and everything can be going up to satisfy them. And I also understand that they will operate, that the intention is for them to operate for the first few years without giving government a cent. We need to stop this nonsense. Oh? So when you mention this ease of doing business here, that triggered a problem that I have, because those people came to my office and panicked because their jobs are going to give away our jobs to non-nationals and put our people on the breadline and then tell them, go out and see Corey. Right? So as I said, I'm not opposing this bill. I'm happy for it, and I'm glad that it will give us greater protection, but there are certain things that I would like to see addressed. Senator Holder mentioned the one with the 3 people, and so I'm not going to do much more than that, other than to say that some consideration should be given also to not force those people to pay to work. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Franklin. I now recognize Senator Greenwich.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on the last occasion that this bill was debated in the Senate, I did not get the opportunity to speak, but I had made some notes on the bill, some old notes, and I myself was just trying to decipher exactly what these notes are saying. Now, I see here that I had made the point that I reflected on the bill, and in so doing, I reminded myself that there are many individuals, perhaps the world over, not necessarily in Barbados alone, who have tremendous appetites for information. And indeed, sir, when it comes to that desire to obtain information, human beings, as I said, have that insatiable appetite to find out, insatiable appetite for our information, especially, sir, when that information can be of help to them financially or otherwise. Yes, sir. And indeed, sir, no one knows about people trying to get this information. Indeed, sir. Yeah. No one knows better about persons trying to get this information about others than those of us who have worked around the law courts for some time. It would surprise you, it wouldn't surprise you, Mr. President. It might surprise others in the chamber. I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you to know that Barbadians have gone into our registration department trying to find out things like if Mr. Jones, who died yesterday, had made a will, and if he has made any provision for me in that will. People have actually gone to the registration department to find out something like that. Yes, and some of them have gone to the registration department to find out if it is true that my boyfriend, Tom Jones, who lives in Marleyvale, if it is true that he got married last weekend. People have gone to the registry and they have asked those questions. Because he liking me too, and I want to know if it is true that he went and got married. People have gone to the registration department, Mr. President, as you would know, trying to find out whether Mary Jones, who registered her baby a week ago, has put down Tom Jones as the father, because Tom Jones is my boyfriend. They have this, and this is a fact. This is a fact. They want to know if Tom Jones' name is on that birth certificate. And they go there and they will boldly ask to give me this information. If I can get a birth certificate from Mary Jones, who I hear is like my husband, I want to know how she is, because he could be she father. And they want the birth certificate of that particular lady, that girl. They want to know whether John Doe and his wife are really divorced for truth, because they see coming around my daughter. And all those people want information. They will go to the registration department and they will ask for the information. And I say all this, sir, because I just want to remind the Senate that this hunger in human beings for information, exactly, the more salacious the better, and it is also carried over now into cyber. It is digital, it's gone viral. The same yearning for information that we have at the registration department. And so, even at our registration department, we have had to put different measures in place. We have had to put safeguards in place. Restrictions had to be put in place to curb that craving for appetite by the public. And to protect people, of course, because there used to be a time when we used to term all these documents public documents. And therefore, to the public, it meant that if it is available to the public. If it is a public document, it is available to the public. And so you had to put some restrictions on it. And you cannot now get a birth certificate and so on as easily as before. What you have to do now is to carry the ID of the person whose birth certificate you are requesting. You have to carry that, and then you'll be allowed to get it. It is easy, very easy, to get your own. But when it comes to getting someone else's now, there is a little problem. Where this data protection bill is concerned, I have to begin by saying that in this area of technology, the world has advanced so quickly that every one of us is now vulnerable. Every one of us is vulnerable as we do our business. Personally, I do not like giving my credit card number to anybody over the phone. I don't even like giving it to the receptionist at the desk at the hotel. I feel very uncomfortable doing it. But the fact of the matter, sir, is that I cannot complete my booking. I can't get a room unless I give it. So really and truly, it's the Hobson's choice. This or none. You have to either give it or you don't get a room and you go back home. Yes, I had that incident, Mr. President. I had an incident where I am at a hotel in Miami. And I go there with my credit card. It was my fault. I admit it was my fault. I did not tell my bank here that I was traveling. I always tell them when I travel. And I didn't tell them. So my thing was disallowed. It was refused. And I took my pocket, I go on in my pocket for cash. I tell them no problem. I'll pay for the 3 nights. You don't take cash. You don't take cash. I had to use the same phone, call the bank in Barbados, and let them reopen or whatever the term is, the card, my credit, so that I could use it. But they won't take the cash. But I'm saying so that today, no aspect of social media is safe. I say so. No aspect of social media is safe. Indeed, sir, social media has not helped to make us any safer. Indeed, to my way of thinking, social media has helped to make us more vulnerable. I have, sir, 2 female, one is a relative and one is not. Let's call them 2 friends of mine. And they are now addicted to online shopping. And I mean addicted in the true sense of the word. Addicted to online shopping. Love to order online. And I find a lot of Barbadians do it too. Ordering online. This is the latest craze. And it would appear to me as though all of the big stores know that people the world over have become addicted to this online craze. And so you get some stores like the J.C. Penney's and the Walmarts and the Macy's of this world who are going one up on each other, to the point where now you can stay in your house and order online, and they will actually deliver what you've ordered to your home. So you don't even have to go to the store. In places in the United States and things, people stay in their homes and order from Publix, the supermarket, and Walmart, and those people order sometimes, as you would say, what they don't want. And the people will turn up at your house bearing these things that you have ordered. It's a craze. You don't even have to pass close to the stores. But obviously, sir, the more online shopping you do, to me, the more vulnerable you become. And the people who are the skimmers and the scammers overseas, I believe, sir, that right now there is someone in England who might be trying to access the information from the credit card that is in your pocket. Because man has made that computer, and man will be able to get ahead one step of that computer. We have had people come to Barbados from places like Bulgaria and Argentina here in Barbados doing something called skimming. And they were able to access our people's accounts and to carry away thousands of dollars from them. Once there is an invention, Mr. President, believe me, somebody is there ready to take that to another level and be one step ahead of it. There's some persons, sir, who sit down 24/7 in front of a computer trying to find out ways and means of accessing your information and getting that one step ahead of you. And so, Mr. President, just as you and I, and of course everybody in here knows, that there is a law that expressly states in Barbados, and it's a law that was there for years and years, that if you are caught stealing, you can be punished by fine or imprisonment or both. That law was there a long time, but that law never suggested that the law alone was sufficient. In other words, that law never suggested that you should carelessly leave your doors unlocked and your windows unbolted and that the law would take care of you. And so in similar vein, Mr. President, all this legislation is saying is that we have a piece of legislation in place, and that if someone is caught, then that person can be prosecuted. And that the person who caused your information to be accessed will be prosecuted as well. In other words, exactly. If you give your legitimate information to the banks and the stores and so on, you don't expect them to allow others to access that information. And Senator Drakes and Senator Sands have outlined some of the obligations of those who possess your information. Nowadays, they have to be very careful. The fines are extremely heavy, and businesses will have to put their house in order or face the consequences. And so, as you were saying, Mr. President, it's a word to the consumer. The key thing is to protect yourself. The key thing is to protect yourself. The onus is on you for your own safety. You cannot afford to be careless. Do the basics and protect yourself. And you have to check to make sure that the company you are dealing with is a reputable company. You do not shop, for instance, online with any company. Indeed, sir, there could be an Amazon online with a different logo. And sometimes you may innocently and unwittingly go and give your information to that particular Amazon, thinking that that is the genuine and the real and the proper one, only to find that you have given your information to someone who actually wanted to intercept that information. And I'm saying so that you should not for one moment think that automatically from today, when this, well, from now, that all of your information is now safe. It is not. You have to do your part to make sure that you are not duped by those who are the skimmers and the scammers. No Barbadian, sir, should be so naive as to believe that his information is now tamper-proof. And so, Mr. President, I, without any doubt whatsoever, give my full support to the legislation. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Goodage. I next recognize Senator Rudy Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not intend to detain the Senate in relation to the discussion on this resolution. And with respect to the data protection bill. But I wanted, sir, to lend my voice in support of the resolution, reflecting on the report, as well as to say a few words in relation to the bill. Of course, sir, when the bill was first debated, unfortunately, I was not in the chamber and could not make any comments in relation to the bill. But I do believe, sir, that the minister responsible for this area should be commended on the work which she and officers in her department have undertaken with respect to the bill and in going through the process which they did. In looking at the bill, sir, I did have to think of the overall importance of information communication technology and to come to the realization that we exist in an age where there has to be the embracing of the technology and the utilization of the technology. And I heard my colleague senator, the deputy president of the Senate, reflect on the issues of the use of credit cards, which I have to say, Mr. President, I myself, I am at times concerned about the use of credit cards online and engaging in business transactions online. But it's a reality that we have to face. Yesterday, I went into a commercial bank and I was engaging in some business which required me to make a payment outside of Barbados. So I went into the foreign exchange section. I had, sir, my forms filled out before, and I had to wait about half an hour before I was able to get to the teller. And when I got to the teller, I asked her, is there any way that this can be processed faster? And she said to me, what I can do is that I can send you the central bank form online, and you can fill out that form, and then you can, if you are engaged in online banking, which I am already doing, then you can go online and you can actually make the payment. And then she went on to say, sir, that within a very short period of a month or two, she indicated that in that bank, and my suspicion is that once it starts in one commercial bank, that it will happen for the other commercial banks. She indicated that within a month or 2 months, you will no longer be able to process transfer payments like that by the filling out of forms. You will have to do it online. And the reality is that those of us who are concerned about utilizing information and communication technology and using our credit cards online and engaging in online banking have now to come to the acceptance that this is a reality that we cannot get away from, and come to the acceptance that there needs to be put in place the necessary legislation to protect individuals and to protect the information that is communicated to entities that we engage in business with. So as I reflect on this debate as well, I remember while I was, I think in fifth form at the Lodge School, that there was a book of modern short stories. There was one science fiction short story written by E.M. Forster, I believe. The name of that short story was The Machine Stops. Sir, it was about a world where human beings essentially did not interact with each other. Humans existed in a cell. Their spiritual and material needs were met by being in this cell. And essentially, they were provided with everything by an omnipotent machine, just the computer. And one day, sir, the machine just stopped, and the world went into chaos. And I reflect on that because, sir, while we are driven significantly by the new realities of the ICT and making sure we have the necessary systems in place to exploit the utilization of the technology, let us also ensure that we are able to put the redundancy mechanisms in place that should the machine stop, we are able, Mr. President, to continue with our business and to carry on in a manner that does not disrupt operations. So, sir, I support the resolution, I support the bill. The reality is as well that we exist in a global environment. A lot of these measures existing in the bill, sir, are compliant with the EU General Protection Data Regulations, the GPDR. And although these regulations were developed from the EU perspective for businesses in the EU and entities doing business with those EU companies, the truth is that the measures are, as identified, are measures, sir, that I believe to be important and measures to be worthwhile. I am of the view, sir, that failure to embrace the type of measures contained in the bill and to take consideration of the discussions that were undertaken with respect to the report, that if we fail to do that, sir, that the damage which could result could prove to be more catastrophic than a hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane hitting Barbados. And what do I mean by that? I don't reflect, sir, or refer to the physical elements of things, but because we are so involved and integrated so much with the technology, if we fail to take the necessary measures that are required to protect the information and to protect the manner in which we are utilizing the different systems, then we can find a situation where through persons that have a different perspective, those that engage in cyber crimes and engage in cyber attacks, that they're able to completely wipe out the systems that exist and cause chaos within our environment. So I think the reality of the situation requires us to embrace the digital technologies, and it also requires us, sir, to give our support to the measures as exist within the bill. I just want to, sir, make a few references to some elements in the bill. The manner in which there's reference to the collection of data, the security and the safeguards, both with respect to public and private. And I want to make reference to the tourism industry. Mr. President, a lot of persons coming to Barbados would have been provided with packages by tour operators. And a lot of those persons would have provided some personal information to the hotels, to provide personal information as well to attractions. And it is important that we ensure that our local businesses are in compliance with these new international standards and the international laws that exist, so that there can be no penalty. The reality is that even though the measures such as these may not necessarily begin with us, the truth is that if we fail to comply, then the impact on us could be more severe, because as I said before, the GPDR regulations, even though structured in the EU, have serious implications for businesses that are participating or engaging in activities with EU companies. So I want to commend the minister and her staff with respect to that provision. I also believe, sir, that businesses coming to Barbados, foreign businesses being encouraged to come to Barbados, would be very happy to recognize the provisions that deal with the issues of breaches and the manner in which breaches are to be dealt with. Because it is one thing to reference and to speak about the breaches, but it is another thing, sir, to relate to the fact that under the, I believe it's the data controller, that there are specific provisions that are made for the dealing in a specified manner with the breaches that are identified. I also, sir, want to compliment the minister with respect to the aspect which relates to security and the aspect which relates to consent. Again, it makes reference to the data controller being involved in those elements, and essentially what is happening is that there are provisions provided with respect to the consent where personal data has to be, in order to be used, given the express approval of the person that it relates to. I've heard in the chamber referenced in this debate, reference to the fact that sometimes data is collected for one thing, but then that data is used for something else. And it is used for something else without the knowledge of the individual from whom it has been collected. And that certainly is not a situation that we should allow. And I believe that the bill properly reflects ensuring that consent is provided in a manner that is expressed, and consent also relating to how it should be undertaken for a child. The issue, of course, to businesses to adhere to with respect to the small, medium enterprises, I think Senator Holder has spoken extensively to that, and I don't intend to speak in any more detail with respect to that, but to say that we do have to be conscious of the fact that sometimes to adhere to provisions, there is a cost component that exists, and we have to ensure that we are able to bring all of our entities along. So essentially, sir, this bill and the resolution before the Senate provides the opportunity for individuals to have control over their personal data. I believe that that is very important, and that should be embraced and encouraged. And I think that the direction in which the ministry is going is one that is appropriate and good. And therefore, sir, with those very few words, I want to give my support to the resolution before this honorable chamber.
Senator McGonigal? Senator McCartney?
Mr. President, I wish, in wrapping up our discussions on this resolution, I wish to start by giving, with gratitude really, thanking those who have been part of the consultations and who have made contributions that have led to this bill in its now revised state. And those who have also put forward things for us to consider as we will create the enabling regulations that go with this bill. as well as those who would have pointed out where the opportunities are for us to make way in our preparations to ensure that in implementing all are included, including those we consider most vulnerable, would be most challenged to implement. I want to thank the 11 members of the Joint Select Committee of the two houses, which I had the privilege to share, and who did very diligent work, I must say, in bringing this to the stage. I want to thank the organizations and the individuals who made submissions, the CPC drafters, and with your permission, Mr. President, to use the name of Ms. Sean Bell, who is the senior parliamentary counsel who contributed significantly to the drafting of this bill. And also to acknowledge, because it was not this ministry working alone, this is a government that works collaboratively, and the Ministry of Small Business, Entrepreneurship and Commerce, particular Mr. Dwight Sutherland, Minister Dwight Sutherland, as well as Mr. Chesterfield Coppin. They were all very instrumental in helping us to bring this to this point. The amendments that are reflected in the revised bill that are part of this report, that's the subject of this resolution. I will not go over them one by one because I believe Senator Drakes and Senator Sands would have done that very, very ably. But I would want to make the point, Mr. President, that all of the amendments that were made came out of either consultations or oral contributions or written contributions from the public. We sought to make sure that organizations as well as individuals had that opportunity to contribute, whether it was with regards to clarifications, new definitions, deleting of unhelpful information, or the inclusion of clauses that would protect the data subject and others. Mr. President, the need for ongoing public awareness and an education campaign is imperative as we advance this bill through all the various stages for it to become law, up to and during implementation. I'm being optimistic, Mr. President, that this bill will indeed pass. This is greenfield legislation. It is new. And we have made the effort to consider the concerns, the needs, and even the fears of companies, associations, and individuals who are ready in themselves to be part of this new paradigm in the way we do business and how we treat personal data. This bill has been designed to the highest standards in turn that exist currently in the world for data protection, particularly the General Data Protection Regulations of the EU, the GDPR. And once passed, I can assure you that the ministry over which I have oversight and has responsibility for this, the implementation of, would be responsible for the implementation of the Act once passed, that we will listen and we will enable to the extent that we can, that this government will implement and we will learn, that we will review and we will update as necessary, and that we may even have to pivot. And this is when you are dealing with something that is new and when the entire world is still working on how to make it right. Mr. President, I think we all acknowledge that we are at the point of no return. There is no turning back from where we are going now. And so we might as well embrace the future that is before us and step forward in a way that says we can boldly go. Now, Mr. President, data, and I believe it was Senator Greenidge who talked about the insatiable appetite for information. In this digital age, data has value like it has never had before. But what is wonderful as a message and as the message in this bill is that this value belongs to you. We own our data.
And I think that that is one of the single most important messages that I would want people to carry away. When people have your data, other entities, other organizations, the data does not belong to them, it belongs to you. And therefore, because you own your own data, you have ownership rights. And this bill seeks to specify those rights, be it to access information that the data controller has on you. If another entity has information on you, you have a right to know what it is and to have access to it. You have the right to correct false data. If it is false, you have the right to have it corrected. You have the right to be forgotten or to have your information erased, except in special circumstances that are outlined here in the bill. You have the right to restrict or even prevent other entities from processing your data, and you have the right to receive it in a way that is machine readable or in a way that is readable to you. So you understand that as you own your data, which is the single most important piece of this legislation, you have rights that go with it. Now, it was with sadness that I heard Senator Franklin and Senator Grinnell speak about circumstances in which persons abused the privilege of data. This is why we need a piece of legislation like this. Currently, they are acting outside of any law. Once this is enacted, it then brings them into the law so that that behavior can then be checked, and that the appropriate monitoring and the appropriate remedies can be made in situations where they are in breach. I also heard the plea of Senator Holder for the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And it is important that as we move forward, we create the level of support that might be necessary. We provide the level of education that will be necessary. And I also want to draw the attention to clause 64.2, where it speaks to the ability of groups to be able to engage a single privacy officer. There is an opportunity to pool resources to be able to make implementation when that time comes more affordable. And so I just want to say there are provisions within this act, and when the time comes and the education starts to roll out and the public awareness starts to roll out, there are those minute points where we will see where in the act can we help to enable the level of support that will be required for small and medium enterprises. And I know that Minister Sutherland is working with speed and with empathy with the micro, small, and medium enterprises to ensure that their concerns are taken into account. Mr. President, this revised bill also speaks to principles that any processor or controller must respect in treating your data. And for those who spoke about some concern in that regard, those principles are captured in Part 2, Clause 4, which I hope will give some kind of solace to those that understand that there are principles and that there are specific responsibilities that are laid out, responsibilities with regards to putting safeguards in place and ensuring that the security of the data that people control, that security is adequately in place. And I want to say, Mr. President, that our engagement with the public of Barbados, be it as in the government sphere, the private sector, small, medium enterprises, any of the client groups and stakeholders that will all be subject to this law, that we equally give consideration to those who want exceptions from implementing the rule, and that we also give equal consideration to those who are aspiring to excellence within the rules, who can then become models for those who are still trying to find their way. In concluding, Mr. President, I have to say that we as a people have endured uncertain journeys to arrive in a new world. This bill helps us to step boldly with our plan for transformation into another new world, an evolving digital world, where the outcomes are uncertain. But what we do know, Mr. President, and I reiterate, is that we are at a point of no return. There will be transitions and there will be setbacks. There will be early adopters and there will be laggards. And through it all, we must lock step with each other at all levels, in all sectors, to move boldly into a digitally empowered future. And I will close by saying, Mr. President, not by fear, but by faith shall we go forth. With those few words, Mr. President, I ask that we now adopt this resolution.
The question is that the report of the Joint Select Committee on the Data Protection Bill of 2019 be now adopted. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Think the ayes have it, and the report has now been adopted.
Mr. President, having adopted the report of the Select Committee, the standing orders then allow us to go straight to the third reading of the bill. So at order number 1, in the name of Senator, the Honourable Ms. K. McConney, to resume debate on the data protection bill and therefore move to this third reading.
I beg to move, Mr. President, that this bill now be read a third time.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I now beg to move that this bill
Now pass.
be now passed and cited as the Data Protection Act 2019.
The question is that the bill under consideration will now pass and be so cited. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The bill is now law and will be so cited.
You mean
Sorry about that, Mr. President. This brings us to the end of our business for today, and I want to move that this session be adjourned until Wednesday, the 31st of July. Thank you.
Thank you. 31st. The question is that this sitting be now adjourned until Wednesday the 31st. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. And the Senate is now adjourned until
Are you want Friday?
31st of July 2019.
I can't prepare to do a lot of work.